founding of the Russian Empire by Peter the Great started with the appropriation of a foreign name. The word Rus had up to that point been used for the descendants of the Kievan Rus. Yet, with a feather stroke, Rus became Russian and suddenly meant inhabitants of the Tsardom of Muscovy. Since then, stealing territories, history and culture has become a well-established tool of Russian imperialism. From the 18th century to today, everything of value can, could and would be declared Russian and appropriated, usually by physical force, but often enough by propaganda. When and how did this kleptomanic appropriation of history become so deeply entrenched in Russian political culture? And how much has Russia already stolen from Ukraine? And how much more is left for Russia to steal from Ukraine? Russia has been striving to completely destroy the Ukrainian identity and everything related to it for centuries. Because of this, stereotypes were minted that spread all over the world. Ukraine is being portrayed as an unruly province of Russia, and Ukrainian is nothing more than a Russian dialect. Russia has claimed the history of the medieval state of the Rus as its own. All of this culminated in the most recent times, when President Vladimir Putin surprised the world with a rather fantastic claim that Ukraine was founded by Lenin. And Russia basically hijacked the victory of the multinational Soviet Union over the Third Reich in the Second World War. And this even though at least a quarter of the Red Army consisted of Ukrainians. Russia goes on coming up with new historical falsifications that serve to weaken the state in its near neighborhood. And all of this referring to not only the relations between Russia and Ukraine, but also many other countries all over the world. My name is Gregor Razumovsky. I have been researching history and communications for more than 20 years. And today I will tell you more about how Russia stole someone else's history. At the reception in honor of Germany's capitulation in spring 1945, the dictator Stalin boasted, "To the health of the Russian people, the most outstanding nation of all the nations forming the Soviet Union, because it has won in this war universal recognition as a leading force of the Soviet Union among all the nations of our country." This statement started the campaign of appropriating the victory in World War II by Russia, 65 years after Stalin's death. Putin exactly repeated this narrative. To quote, "We would win the war anyway, because we're the people of winners. The Russian Soviet Republic suffered the heaviest casualties, over 70%. The war was won primarily due to the resources of the Russian Federation. It is phenomenal how Russia diminishes the contribution of other nations and countries. I do believe it is generally accepted that a coalition consisting of Great Britain, France, the USA, Belgium, Norway, the Netherlands, as well as 14 of today's independent countries, former Soviet republics, fought against Hitler in the Second World War. Moreover, it is enough to look at the map of the Second World War to understand that the hostilities did not concern much of the territory of the Russian Soviet Republic. Main battlefields included Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Belarus and Ukraine. These countries suffered enormous destruction, at first from the offensive of the German army and later from the counter-offensive of the Soviet one. For instance, the territory of Ukraine comprised 45% of all material losses of the USSR, while only 3% of the territory of modern Russia was destroyed. There are similar statistics on human losses. According to the official census of 1940 and 1945, the population of the Ukrainian Republic decreased by a considerable 13 million. This is almost half of the total number of losses documented by Soviet authorities. Contrary to facts, Russians seek to present themselves as the only victors in defeating the Third Reich. And this, not just in the eyes of Europe, but also very much their own. The narrative about the great victory gained by Russia and the grandfathers who fought, as much as the newer story about the Eternal Regiment, became a sacred basis for national politics and pride. And from the Kremlin media, it spread down to the kindergarten. At the same time, references to the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939, certifying Hitler's and Stalin's agreement on the invasion plans for the countries of Northern and Eastern Europe, are still prohibited in Russia and punishable by fines and imprisonment. In 1721, Peter I renamed by decree Muscovy, or the Duchy of Moscow, into the Russian Empire. And thus, on the world map, a new state with the ancient or even stolen name appears. The word Rus, from which Russian and Russia derive, was taken by Peter I to solidify his claims to Russia being European. With its capital situated within the space of modern Kiev, the Rus was one of the European superstates of the 9th to 13th century. This powerful state expanded from modern Ukraine to wide swaths of Belarus and partially Poland. The Kievan Rus was an integral element of Europe, participating in trade and sharing culture and development. The Tsardom of Muscovy, or Moscow, appears in the historical sources only in 1277. In other words, 400 years after the foundation of the Kievan Rus. And this, some 1,000 kilometers to the northeast of Kiev, well outside of the historical boundaries of the Rus. This fact does not prevent Moscow autocrats from trying to appropriate the identity of foreign countries and people. The rulers of the Tsardom of Muscovy falsify the historical narratives up to today. The audit of artifacts and ancient sources is conducted under the personal control of Catherine II. Some of them are rewritten, some are destroyed. One by one, books with phony scientific theories on the connection of the Tsardom of Muscovy and the Kievan Rus are published. The Kievan rulers are renamed according to the great Russian manner. Vladimir is what was before Volodymyr. Olha became Olga. The ancient adjective Rus is substituted by a modified word Russian. The stolen brands of Kievan Rus had to be pass membership ticket for Muscovy into the European community. However, it became only a justification for bloodthirsty imperial ambitions and a proof of a megalomaniac inability to deal with its own real history. 2014, contrary to the norms of international law, Russia invades the sovereign territory of Ukraine. Due to thousands of special forces soldiers, armored vehicles, artillery and warships of the Russian Navy, the Russians removed democratically elected authorities of the Ukrainian peninsula of the Crimea. Instead, they appoint Moscow-controlled officials and simulate the conducting of a referendum, the fake results of which allegedly demonstrate the support of the people to the Russian actions. At the same time, the Kremlin starts a terror against pro-Ukrainian people in the Crimea. The illegal criminal prosecutions, violent abductions, restrictions on basic rights and freedom. The Crimean Tatars, the representatives of one of the three largest ethnic groups on the peninsula, are subject to this regular repression. The unprovoked military seizure of Ukrainian Crimea is called accession by Russia. In his speeches, Putin promotes the narratives about the historical right to own the territory. Crimea has always been an essential part of Russia. And what is more, this is our historical territory where the Russian people live. This is our land. Moscow steals Crimea also through the favorite method of Stalin, such as displacement of indigenous people and replacing them by immigrants. During the years of annexation, 180,000 Ukrainians were forced to leave the Crimea. Almost 1 million of Russians were brought there to replace them. This is how the Kremlin tries to artificially change the ethnic composition of the peninsula, falsifying yet another justification for the annexation of foreign territory. The main tourist symbol for Russia, the souvenir par excellence, was also stolen. This toy is well known as the Russian doll, or the matryoshka, as it is called by Russians. But there's nothing Russian about this doll, except for a fictional story. This story says that Matryoshka appeared near Moscow in the 19th century. The doll was made as a symbol of Russian life by an artist called Sergei Malyutin. However, this is not quite true. The idea of dolls nesting inside one another has existed since the beginning of the first millennium. This technique was invented in China. Later, it spread to Japan. For instance, a figure of the Japanese deity Fukurokuju. It is a wooden doll that can be taken apart and it reveals 6 other gods inside. Now, does this remind you of anything? Or, for example, the Kokeshi dolls that were also widely popular in Japan. Unlike the Russian nesting dolls, they were first mentioned not in the 19th, but in the 17th century. On June the 15th, in the year 1775, by the order of Catherine the Great, Russian troops destroyed the Zaporozhian siege. This was officially declared in the manifesto in August 1775. This event is considered to be the most important one in the history of Ukraine. It became one of the last steps in the liquidation of autonomy and the complete incorporation of the Ukrainian lands into the Russian Empire. After the destruction of the Zaporozhian siege, some Cossacks moved to the Ottoman Empire, and where a new siege was founded on the Danube. Others remained under the rule of the Russian monarchs. And in order to curb the powerful force of the Cossack will and direct the Cossack energy in their controlled direction, Russia found a solution. And this was the decision to create artificial, irregular Cossack troops, the so-called Army of Faithful Cossacks, which was formed from the former Zaporozhians, which in April 1788 then got renamed into Black Sea Cossack Army. In form, they were Cossacks, but in fact, they were slaves. And the main duty of such formations was military service. In peaceful time, they were supposed to be engaged in farming, cattle breeding, etc. Although outwardly, the organization of these Cossacks resembled the ancient times, most Cossack units were subordinate to Russian leaders and didn't have the right to elect their leaders, their own court, and so on. In fact, all the achievements of the democratic Cossacks were leveled. This is YouTube channel, The Power of Reason. Always remember that our true power lies in rational thought and a clear mind when we're threatened with the daily flow of disinformation and the manipulation of news. So, please do the reasonable thing and subscribe to our channel right now.